Welcome back to the History Show on Uxbridge FM, and Ken Pearce is back, joining us again with another run-through of Uxbridge history. Today, our subject is Railways, Part 1. Good morning, Ken, again.
Good morning.
Now, let's hear all about Railways, Part 1. There's lots to tell, I believe, in Uxbridge.
Well, let's have a go. It was a group of merchants and businessmen in Bristol who first planned a rail link with London. They worked out a route and they employed a brilliant young engineer, Isambard Kingdom Brunel, before they contacted a similar group in London. Support was readily forthcoming there, and so the Great Western Railway came into being, secured by Act of Parliament in August 1835. The new company soon earned the reputation for doing things differently to everyone else, and this was certainly true of the gauge. That means the distance between the rails. Other railways at that time were using what's called a standard gauge of 4 feet 8.5 inches between the rails. Young Brunel came up with the idea of a 7-foot gauge, believing that it would be possible to build larger trains and carry more people. So the Great Western Railway was therefore constructed on this broad gauge principle. 2 locomotives, named Premier and Vulcan, were initially ordered from factories in Liverpool, and when ready, were conveyed by sea up the Channel into the Thames to Brentford. They were then transferred to canal barges and brought to West Drayton, where the canal was very close to the new railway. So those little locomotives were swung into position. Needless to say, they were a lot smaller than the monsters of later years. But West Drayton, as a result, became the first locomotive depot of the Great Western Railway. One of the directors of the company, G.H. Gibbs, recorded this first locomotive trial on the 9th of January 1838. I quote, "At West Drayton we were much pleased to find that the 2 engines were about to be tried. After walking with Brunel as far as the Chequers Bridge, admiring the rails exceedingly, we returned to the engine house. The engines, after some delay getting up steam, sallied forth, but the curve at the entrance was too sharp for them, and they came off the rails 2 or 3 times, and it was an hour before they could be got on the main line. But when there, however, they performed beautifully, and we had a very interesting drive." The first train actually ran from London as far as Maidenhead on the 4th of June 1838. The locomotives were not really reliable in those early days, and that first journey actually took 80 minutes. The carriages were jolting and jerking, making for a very uncomfortable ride. So the company were careful to give departure times for their trains, but were careful not to give the times of arrival. At first, there were only 2 intermediate stops at West Drayton and Slough. Fares were initially very expensive. A journey from London to West Drayton, first class, was 4 shillings. A ride in an open carriage, with presumably no roof, cost 1 and 6pence. The opening of the line soon had an effect on the economy of the market town of Uxbridge, and in particular its stagecoach traffic. As rail traffic improved, offering fast and smooth journeys, the slow and uncomfortable coaches travelling on unsurfaced roads became increasingly unpopular. Stagecoach firms began to go out of business. Realizing that Uxbridge was losing out because it was not on a railway, a group of local traders attempted to promote a line themselves from Uxbridge to West Drayton in 1846. But sufficient financial backing was not achieved, and they had to abandon their scheme. Fortunately, the plan was taken over by the GWR as a result of local pressure, and parliamentary approval was given in 1853. And so work began on a single broad gauge line from West Drayton Station to a terminus in Vine Street in Uxbridge. The line opened on 8th of September 1856. The return fare from Uxbridge to London was 3 and 4pence, and from Uxbridge to West Drayton, 9pence. And the following day, the enterprising landlord of the White Horse Inn, Mr. House, started a horse bus service from the station to his inn, meeting every train. The local directory the following year reported, "The station in Uxbridge is a large and commodious building in the Elizabethan style of architecture, and possesses accommodation for passengers in many respects equal to stations whose pretensions are much higher." In the long run, the GWR lost the battle of the gauges and had to convert to standard gauge. On most of their lines, a third rail was added so that the gradual changeover could take place. But on the Uxbridge branch, it was different. In October 1871, the local paper reported, "Between midnight on Friday last and 7 o'clock on Saturday morning, the line between Uxbridge and West Drayton was altered from broad to narrow gauge. A gang of nearly 200 men was employed." Clearly, they had just moved one rail across to the right place. The change was actually a great relief to local travellers because the old broad gauge engine on that line had been continually breaking down, so they were glad to see it go. In 1881, the track on the branch line was doubled, and a signalling apparatus was brought into use. Cowley Station opened on the 2nd of October 1904. In his autobiography, Memoirs of a Veterinary Surgeon, published in 1907, Reginald Hancock wrote, "Railway travel was not the swift and luxurious business it is today. The suburban stock of the Great Western Railway consisted of 4-wheel coaches whose compartments were upholstered with Spartan severity in the first and second class. Third-class passengers sat on bare boards. The carriages were unheated, but on application to a porter, a flattened iron cylinder of hot water was provided on which the feet could be rested. Most travellers took rugs with them, and overcoats were of a weight and density of fabric that few would imagine in our days." So this branch line was the only rail link that Uxbridge had until the early years of the 20th century. On another occasion, I plan to cover the story from then on.
Thank you very much, Ken. Very interesting. And there's lots of happenings in the railway in Uxbridge, isn't there? All kinds of stories.
Yes, indeed.
I think three stations at one point in Uxbridge.
Yes, that's correct.
So only one now. Lots of movement as well. I think where the Bucks University is now, that was a station round about there.
That's right.
And they've also moved the Met Line station, haven't they, in history? It's not where it used to be. I think Sainsbury's.
The original station was where Sainsbury's is now.
Yes. And the Vine Street station is completely disappeared, isn't it? I think roughly where,
that's right.
Hertz rent a car, maybe, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Fantastic. That's a great story about railways in Uxbridge, and we look forward to part 2 later. For now, thank you very much, Ken.
Righto.